anyone else joining late. So we should be good to go.
Okay, thanks, Prajita. So, hi everyone, and welcome to the seventh session in our core capacity series. Before we start, just a small note. Unfortunately, Rini wasn't able to join in today because she's taken ill, so she had to pull out last minute. But from our team, we have Puru with us, who's my colleague from the Villgro team. He manages impact measurement and technology at Villgro. So he'll be kind of taking us through some of the aspects we wanted to cover. Although Rini, once she's back, she's open to conducting an optional session sometime next week. So you're free to attend that. We'll share details when we do end up organizing that. If there are any questions you would want to direct to her specifically, feel free to write directly to the Villgro team, and we can kind of set that up as well. So just wanted to give you that heads up before we get started. And yeah, I'll just set the tone for today. So today's session is on tracking impact, how to capture data for trust and growth. And as businesses grow, measuring impact isn't just about reporting, but also about demonstrating credibility and effectively communicating the value of your work. So this is something that is key to scaling beyond just the numbers and the financials, because it helps engage the right kinds of partners, investors, and customers. So today, to help us unpack this from two complementary perspectives, we have two speakers with us from the Villgro and WRI India teams, who will take you one through why impact measurement matters from an investor's lens, especially, and then moving on to how to design, practical and credible systems for measuring and monitoring that impact on ground. So our first speaker from Villgro is Purushotham Shivkumar, who is better known as Puru. He's the manager for impact measurement and technology at Villgro, as I mentioned, and his work spans across landscape assessments, impact theses, and portfolio monitoring for our startups across circular economy, agriculture, rural livelihoods, and climate tech. Puru's also conducted startup and donor-facing assessments and partnered with various MEL agencies to build impact frameworks and evaluate programs. So today he'll be drawing on his work across innovation mapping and portfolio learnings to share what investors look for in impact data and why credible evidence is becoming very essential for startups seeking to build trust and unlock growth. And our second speaker for today is Dr. Rajasweta Datta, who's the program manager for mapping and monitoring at WRI India. She leads the development of mapping and monitoring methodologies for restoration initiatives and assesses their ecological impact. And as a geospatial researcher with over a decade of experience in remote sensing, GIS, hydrology, and environmental monitoring, she's worked across India, New Zealand, and Antarctica. So in today's session, she'll take you through some of the technical aspects of impact tracking, right from selecting meaningful metrics and establishing baseline measurements to developing practical data collection systems that can help you generate robust evidence. So with that, I'll just invite Puru to kick us off with the investor's perspective on impact tracking. Yeah, over to you, Puru.
Hi everyone, thanks for the introduction, Ananya. So I'll just share my screen as well. Give me a minute. I hope my screen is visible.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So hi everyone. So I have been working in this space for like 4 years now, and majorly like how data is eventually translated into different insights for different stakeholders. But one thing is like eventually we try to see how it is beneficial for startups, right? Like all social enterprises eventually when they try to assess the different kinds of impact they're trying to achieve, what happens is that whether this translates into outcomes for them, like in the form of whether they're able to get build a better ecosystem narrative and build some trust around the kind of business model and the kind of innovation that they're trying to like scale becomes very crucial. And I think that is what we're trying to establish in this navigate in this presentation also. And I will try to like share my learnings and go through how impact tracking and what kind of metrics eventually is something that investors also look for, or even like donors when they're like looking for like evaluate how the program outcome is going to be like. What are those outcomes that even we need to prioritize so that a startup can be mindful of it since beginning, right? And eventually the whole point is that can this support their whole growth story? So how does that data collection and that whole tracking the right kind of metrics signal that acts as a signal for different investors, different stakeholders, and eventually helps people to come and support in the form of working capital, in the form of some kind of partnerships, and supports the growth journey, right? So that is the context, and that is what I'm trying to explain throughout this presentation as well. Uh, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask me at any point of time in the middle of the presentation as well, because that will also be great. Like, it's good to know any questions, but otherwise, I assuming that there's a Q&A session later as well. So I'll get started. So one thing that happens when we start looking at like startups itself is that the whole metrics angle, right? Like, how are these metrics going to translate into like those benefits for the startup in terms of getting more funds, getting more partnerships, helping them build a narrative. But what happens is that the right kind of information is usually not tracked, and that starts from the beginning itself, whether a startup becomes part of a program and in the baseline we miss capturing it, or the startup in the beginning of the journey itself, it does not have that baseline impact or baseline number to show how their journey has started. Now, why I'm talking about this is that the baseline data becomes like the biggest measurable point against which any startup can use it as a counterfactual, right? Now I'll build on to this. Now, why this is necessary is that because sometimes we don't have like a full-fledged system in place which is actually going to track the entirety of it. But from a very funder perspective, the whole angle is that they try to look at what is that additionality that is happening after the intervention goes in, right? And what is that something new that is happening? Say, for example, the classic case of an income uplift, right? Like, or say, for example, we're providing soil analytics to like farmers. And what happens is that eventually we're trying to see that whether that fertilizer cost is going down, whether there's some kind of economics coming into play for these people. And for that, the baseline information becomes very important. And that the story and the narrative building and the support to build the right kind of evidence so that you could raise money as well starts from that baseline aspect itself. While I'm talking about this, I'd also like to start bringing in the picture of how an investor looks at it, right? Now, what happens with classic catalytic capital provider or an impact VC or an impact investor is that they usually try to like underwrite their whole return aspect in favor of this impact, right? Now, for any kind of a fund or even for a program, donor-facing program, what happens is that they try to see whether there's some kind of outcome that is going to come. And when we look at it from strict financial terms as well, they do not want to support things where it will depress their returns. And now to justify that, usually what impact investors or even like blended finance providers they'll do is that they try to like see how can we underwrite this. Like there's going to be they'll try to see, okay, if we are going to like forego of certain kind of returns for a longer period of time, because usually when it comes to early stage startups itself is that we are trying to navigate like longer horizons, right? The time horizon is longer for returns. And especially in the case of social enterprises, sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's early. It really depends on different factors coming into play. But at the time of like providing funds, whether deciding the money is going to go or provided or not, what happens is that they try to understand that impact potential. Now, that is when this data starts playing a role. Whether you could justify the potential impact and whether we will be able to show that, okay, if returns are going to be underwritten against impact, then right? Uh, so that is the perspective. That is why the data becomes very important. And the more credible the impact numbers are, what happens is that that acts as the signal for future growth, because most of these early stage startups are not in that position to like show that there's this is the lifetime value that I could derive out of a customer or an end beneficiary. But when we have that metric that is broken down to an outcome level, where we're saying that, okay, the net income uplift is at a per beneficiary level. So this is where the unit economics comes into play, right? Where at a per beneficiary level, if you're able to say that uh, net income uplift since before my intervention and after is this much, that becomes the growth journey in itself, right? Without even having those metrics that show that cohort retention, that second time sale that is happening, this metrics acts as a proxy, acts as a signal that in future the revenue might come if we start replicating this across different places. And that all lies on the foundation of having that counterfactual information, and that is your baseline, right? And another thing is that the major thing that everyone wants to look at is that, do we have, is it verified enough? One thing is that the output associated with the business. So when it comes to like startups, and when it comes to like uh, trying to associate different impact terminologies with how like businesses function and how the financial aspects go around, what happens is that one thing is the output aspect, right? Say for the waste startup, the amount of waste processed is just available with the startup because that's a business metric in itself. But what happens is that when you look at from a perspective, what is happening, so what, right? Like waste is processed, okay. But then we are doing this for an aspect of getting better impact in terms of outcomes. So the inferred metric here becomes is that, are these waste process leading to some kind of waste being diverted from landfills, right? The whole carbon emissions picture starts coming in. And this is where that verified process and a methodology that is verified, a methodology that has been uh, vetted by experts in the field comes into picture. So that is becomes a very big add-on to like justify, what, I have these numbers which are verified, I have these numbers which are aligned to my growth story as well. And that is how uh, that becomes a major fact of why this is significant, right? Like, and that is why we're focusing on, if we start a journey on measuring impact, having that baseline, ensuring that it's measurable, becomes a crucial factor for a financier or any kind of provider of catalytic capital becomes important, right? So as we're building our understanding around this, what happened, I would also like to touch upon these global different frameworks that exist in the ecosystem. Now, as I said, that there are different criteria that align to whether a person or whether we could justify the kind of impact that we're doing. But there are certain frameworks that already exist in the ecosystem, which becomes very important. Now, from a very investor-specific lens, and also in certain terms, it benefits the organizations in assessing their risks also. Uh, a set frameworks become useful. Like, for example, GRI, I'll just touch upon what each of it does and quickly move on to the main aspects. So what, I'll just say that, so if we are looking at evaluating and assessing our outward impact on the ecosystem, on the environment, this GRA framework becomes useful, right? As compare, and then we have SDGs and everything, which becomes very important from an ecosystem narrative point of view. So I would leave this up to the startups to like see which framework suits them the best, like how they could make use of these frameworks, right? Most of them are like aligned with each other. Say, for example, the task force on nature-related financial disclosures, it is to a certain extent aligned to the GRI itself. While GRI is very outward impact focused, there are these other frameworks focus on like the financial materiality aspect, right? Like what are those climate risks? What are those risks in the ecosystem which will affect the financial bottom line of my organization, right? A mechanization startup, a risk, classic risk is going to be there's labor shortage. If no one is there to run my device, then what's the point of it? But then there are climate risks also that we can factor in. And for that, these frameworks come in handy, and it becomes useful for people who are trying to like build a framework and pitch it to the right person, because an ESG focused investor is going to vet individuals based upon this, right? Like, are we looking at the financial materiality? Are we looking at the impact materiality? And how is the startup more susceptible to the changes that are going to come in the future? So it makes the startup also very future ready in terms of the risks it's going to face. So these frameworks come in handy in that terms. Another thing I really wanted to cover is also on the lines of how these metrics become common across different areas, right? Either we are looking to become part of a program, a grant program run by, say, an incubator like Villgro itself, right? Or we are looking at like a for-profit focused access to capital programs. Now, what happens is that it has become increasingly important across these different the terms of reference are provided by these program portals and everything, is that they are trying to understand the outcomes of your organization, not just in terms of your business metrics, but they also want to look at how susceptible, as I mentioned in the framework part, how susceptible you are to the future change, right? And how ready were you to enter into the geography. Most of the rural livelihoods focused and even farm-based mechanization and anything that focus on across the farm agri life cycle, right? When we come up with the fact of taking a new innovation or a technology and we try to take it to these geographies, the whole angle of training, capacity building, awareness, all this comes in the picture. So usually people try to also look at these things very qualitatively, that you know how well is your business model ready for this as well. But along with this, the outcome metrics on the lines of what is the bigger picture looking like, right? How much were you able to avoid in terms of carbon emissions, and how much were you able to mitigate in terms of the GHG emissions from processing your waste. Now, all those things become a priority when they look at the bigger picture, because at this point, that is what becomes very important. Similarly, you could see that there's like a lot of overlap between the metrics across the previous one was more non-profit focused. This one is more for-profit focused. And we'll cover the what kind of metrics become useful and everything in the later part. So when it comes to like a foundation, what happens is that they again look at the top line metrics, right? And across all this, the verification, the baseline, and how did we go about with our framework building becomes very important when we're communicating the right information, because then things get into question. So we'll cover KPIs from a donor lens. Right. So now here what we this covers different subsectors within which the startups are operating, right? So one classic example that I was constantly giving was on the lines of the waste process, right? Like environmental metrics, how much waste process is an output metric. But clearly, when we look at an environment metric from a reporting point of view, what becomes important is for us to say that what is it leading to, right? From a like if waste is being processed, waste, how much of waste was diverted? And then comes the whole social angle also. Now, why we're looking at this is that when we are moving on to this, the point of how will we build narratives and how do we have the right metrics for the financials, it becomes important to understand that just tracking waste worker livelihoods improve is not just like a compliance thing, right? Like, okay, I'm part of a incubator focused on impact, so we're just tracking this. But what happens is that these metrics become those anchors on which the narrative and how a financial looks, how a capital provider looks at your impact, because the whole point is that they try to like underwrite based upon the information that we provide. Now, if we have a point, an organization that is working across like informal livelihoods and making them formalized, which we do not have here. But uh, from the I'm talking from a very core informal formalization point of view. Uh, what happens is that how much improvement has happened becomes like a progress metric, and it will help them navigate how the startup is going to be functioning in the future as well. Similarly, when it comes to like farm mechanization, like all climate smart and agri-tech startups, is that uh, I wanted that we are trying to like eventually see, for example, the soil testing and the soil analytics one, right? Now we are trying to provide some kind of advisory by taking by testing the soil, giving them on basis on different parameters, and then they get the reports. What happens is that one level is that the activity is happening in itself, but the second level is on the lines of how are they making use of it, right? Are we even solving for the problem around it? Because these farmer when you provide farmers with advisory, the whole goal is that they take it to eventually lead to some kind of benefits for them. It could be in terms of whether it is going to lead to uh, reduction in cost in terms of different areas, right? It could be fertilizers, it could be pesticides, and how do they change their inputs into their uh, into their whole the whole input kits that they get, right? How are they going to change that? How efficiently are they going to use it becomes more important, and that will eventually translate into some kind of like cost economics for them. And those things become important for us to track, and they eventually try to capture the whole angle of how it aligns with the financial aspect. I will like to give an example. One is that angle of full cost of acquisition, right? Um for the per customer basis. Now, what happens is that when it comes to like innovations where we're trying to like build awareness, where we are trying to actually go and do training capacity, and then there's like a lot of subsidies happening, and then eventually the adoption happens. What happens is the cost of acquisition is very high. Now, for us to justify that to an investor becomes like a very long-term journey. And but what happens is that when we track that the benefits is accruing like at a per farmer level, specifically in terms of the cost thing that I mentioned, right? That if we are able to show that at a per farmer level, fertilizer usage, the efficiency has happened and the cost has decreased. Now that becomes like a signal, right? Now that adds on to the higher cost of acquisition, and then it makes sense that, okay, eventually this is going to justify it, and then there might be cohort retention that happens. There might be a second purchase that happens. Second time testing might happen in the case of soil testing, or in the case of where we're trying to deploy decentralized solutions, maybe like SHG women will go ahead with it. So that becomes very important. Another thing from a value chain perspective is that when most of the value chain businesses in the agri space, or even in like classic agriculture, right, the ones that focus on post harvest, also they try to work with SHGs, they try to work with like clusters in the rural areas, and what happens is that the business model in itself provides for the whole buyback aspect. Now, the buyback aspect is something that becomes very uh, limiting when we think about from a scale perspective. Now, why? Because buyback also leads to like faster use of the working capital, right? Like you have to constantly pay out to the person who's actually processing it, giving. Or in the case of like the NTFP, like if the suppliers are there, then you have to like constantly pay them as well, right? So the working capital uh, goes at a very gets used at a very quicker rate, and in that case, what happens is that these metrics or the lines of which justify that, you know, if there is going to be either in the case of the cost of acquisition or in the case of higher working capital that is going to be used, what happens is that the net income uplift, the baseline, the angle of per unit, the per beneficiary level, what is the impact happening? becomes very critical, and that starts building into the decisions that happen to select a startup for the investor or for the program, uh, or the grant focus program, right? So that is what we try to explain. There are a plethora of metrics that we can think, but what I'm trying to see is that if you can even capture the essence of it, of why it is being done, that will be like great, and that will be a win itself. It's a win in itself. So KPIs from an impact investors lens, right? So from an impact investor's lens, what becomes very important are different things that we kept discussing earlier. But now what happens is that the whole the environmental angle is what I kept giving examples around. The outcome becomes important. But from an economic lens, the per beneficiary, the per unit becomes very important, because that will help define how it is the growth journey of the organization, right? If it is not making, if it is not being valuable for even one other one single user level, then what happens is that we do not find those signals where this can be adopted at a larger scale, right? Or it will face a lot of replicability challenges, or like scaling into new geographies will come with like adjusting new audio business models and all those things. So these becomes like good signals that shows that this can function, and this the impact that we're seeing, and that we're saying in the beginning itself that this is intrinsic to the whole business model of and the functioning of the enterprise itself, is something that is durable over time also. Like if a beneficiary after one time is getting so much, then the second time they might come back, right? And this another angle is also on the lines of the capital efficiency, right? If we are providing, say, the how much efficiency per acre is coming in terms of usage of inputs when they're actually growing their crops, right? Is the cost going down, you know? And then the whole angle of whether the cost of acquisition and whether the whole impact angle that we defined to see the whole lifetime value that you could derive using proxies becomes justified or not. And all of this becomes possible only when we have like a standard, like, uh, a whole measurement verification process, which doesn't lead to like doubting at any stage, because your baseline, why I go back to it, is that it is that independent number before your intervention started. And if that is verified, what happens is that uh, it becomes that point where no one will dispute, okay, the change has happened because after your intervention it is so much, and that gives that right pitch, the right anchor to like a lot of like areas, right? Like if you want to build a narrative around different things, around your organization, if you want to build like the right kind of partnerships, right? When it comes to farm mechanization, when we want to like work with institutions which have network of FPOs under them, the transformation journey becomes the anchor, and the transformation journey becomes an anchor when we actually look at uh, what is happening at the your per unit level. Another thing I did not cover previously, but I'll try to like touch upon, is also that the whole catalytic leverage aspect, right? Now there are certain metrics on the lines of say for example, for so much funding, how much revenue did I generate? For so much efforts that we put into acquiring a customer, how much benefit, say for example, how so much cost that the end user has incurred, how much is the benefit coming out to them? So those leverage metrics also become very key to like pitching, because those are the starting points, right? Like when we go ahead and when we try to tell a story, we do not have such long time to like explain our whole process, but those what the impression gets remain in the first few minutes, like, or in just few seconds, like the 60 seconds play a major role, and these numbers stick with them. And that is where the narrative building happens, right? So from a building the investor narrative point of view, so all the things that we discuss eventually ties down here, right? One thing is on the lines of what the problem is it's in itself. Now, because we're trying to solve for a certain thing, and if we have uh, an anchor on it, right? That first is the gap in itself. That okay, this is the gap that we're trying to solve for, and then comes the angle of how we're actually the business is trying to come up with that improvement angle, right? The net income uplift, the cost efficiency at the per unit level, uh, and how that aligns to like the whole business journey in itself, right? That becomes part of it. And then we talk about our intervention itself. So if we are in a position to justify a problem, then we navigate to our intervention. And this is where the whole baseline journey comes into picture, right? Because for any financial and for any person evaluating to take on a startup, the whole additionality point becomes very important. Now, additionality is from two angles, right? From a financial, it could be a lot of things. They don't want to crowd out like commercial capital. They want to ensure that the money is going in new places. That's a whole different angle. But for a startup, what happens is that the intervention has to be a value add, right? It should be solving for something that is broken. And the proof comes when we have that baseline and we use that as a counterfactual in itself, right? Then comes the whole measured impact link and the whole unit economics aspect of if we are able to solve for the problem using such intervention and where we have a baseline journey showing up progress, it has actually we break it down at the unit level, right? The cost efficiency per acre, the cost efficiency for per user of the product, and how much of the uh, in terms of waste also we could try to find out that how much that their unit economics in terms of a beneficiary might not play a role, but also it plays a role that okay, so many tons have been prevented from ending up in landfills, right? So those start playing a role along with your revenue numbers, which affects how your business is going to scale, right? And it helps to build that narrative, that trust for your business, and from that, and then you will be in a position to like get better partners, are in a position to justify your need for capital when you do not have those metrics yet, right? Like when you want to talk about lifetime value, when you want to talk about whether my customers are repeatable, whether there's cohort retention happening, whether my cohort curve is better or not, these impact numbers start helping you signal that. And for the social enterprise, this becomes very important, right? Because those signals act as the play a major role in the journey to avail capital, to build that trust in the ecosystem, so that for organizations that are working in the rural places, institutional partnerships play a major role. And for that, these narrative help this trust building becomes part of the growth journey, helps in the growth journey in itself. So this is what I want to try to cover, uh, and I hope like this gives like a first level understanding into what kind of metrics and how to like start thinking about it, and because everything gets aligned to your financial aspects as well, right? So if there are any questions, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Puru. So I think we can take about 10 minutes or so to cover questions. You can also feel free to talk a little bit about what is the impact measurement process you currently have in place. And, maybe you've already identified certain challenge areas there. We do have a question in chat, which I'll just read out. This is from Dr. Sudha from Akashine. Please feel free to build on this, Dr. Sudha, as Akashine is essentially, Puru, for your context, soil testing device and advisory that's being provided. So their question is, what would be an ideal sample size in general for early stage startups when they start tracking their impact?
Okay, so sample size is from a very research perspective, right? So ideal sample size, which is normally accepted everywhere, is like 30, right? But from a very, say for example, your startup is just doing a pilot somewhere, and sometimes you might not be able to have a larger number of people if the asset is quite capital heavy, right? So it depends on the how you're able to devise your metric itself, right? Because that is why I kept saying that the per beneficiary level, we don't have to average it out, but even if we have like just 10 beneficiaries and we're able to start telling that story, that becomes beneficial in itself. But sample size becomes very important from like a research perspective. That okay, if we're going ahead and we're trying to vet it after my pilot is done or after an intervention is done, what is how many people have benefited out of it? Then it depends upon the scale of your startup also. Right? Ideally, in that case, at least 30 is recommended because that is like the normally accepted standards.
Yeah. Naga said, do you want to come in with your question? I don't see any hands raised, so you can ask it if you want.
Yeah, other thing I think like actual impact data at some level we generally measure today. I think largely around the income that is delivered to the community or just little bit of soil health, all of that. But how do we arrive at a baseline, right? Because baseline is generally very subjective in agriculture, largely because there will not be a credible data source, at least like income and soil health, all of those things. So how do we arrive at? Is there a special methodology or it is self-reported data? Because especially like in the space, I'll just tell you where I'm coming from. We are working around biochar based intervention. So for us, all of it is quantifiable, the amount of biochar we produce, how much has been put back to soil, how much of income has been delivered. So actuals are already there, but where do we baseline upon us? Because general to tell you, okay, this amount of carbon, as in sorry, not carbon, the soil health has been improved all over it. For us, the credible baseline is one of the challenges.
Okay.
Is there any way to actually standardize or look at some particular thing? Okay, maybe we can baseline upon this.
Yeah. See, in the case of Krishi Carbon, it's obviously going to be like you will need a research agency to actually go ahead and like vet the soil, like actually take few samples and see how much is the soil organic carbon content, right? Before you vet. So what ideal situation is that you don't have to go back all the way when your journey started. Even if you're starting a new pilot somewhere or you're like trying to deploy work in a certain geography, the first level is to have that research agency who could actually go and test the sample and give you that average the organic content is so much, right? That is from a whole your final outcome in the in this term is that you want to increase the SOC content, right? And that will have to be done. If you come up with a number that becomes disputed in like a lot of like rooms, right? Like they'll be like, okay, how has this come up? And when a third party agency comes and vets this number and gives you that metric, especially for environment, it becomes very important. Engage with a third party agency to vet that number because that is when the framework is built, right? If we go with existing frameworks for identifying like coming like trying to see whether my scientific numbers are correct, then it doesn't make sense, right? We will need a scientific person to actually vet that. What happens in the case of social impact is that that could be like something that a methodology can be devised based upon if you're saying procuring the biochar. I'm not sure, right? So in case that is the happening, then what happens is that you are in itself in a position because it's your business metric, because right, and you are in a position to justify that okay, I have worked with 100 farmers across so much area, I have processed so much waste, and this is my business metric, and eventually I have led to an additional income for this farmer. Now that additional income aspect at the per beneficiary level becomes a signal that okay, I'm value adding so much. Now the second level question actually becomes is that if I'm value adding so much, is it justifying the cost that is being incurred, right? Which becomes the point where the financial starts thinking, right? And a financial starts thinking from the point perspective of whether it is going to be adopted at certain point of time. And for the beneficiary, the value should be more than the cost, or the value should slowly over time start justifying the cost, then it becomes beneficial for them. Another thing that becomes important is that from the business lens, right? One is whether a beneficiary is finding value, because that will affect your cohort retention. For the business lens, what happens is that from your financial bottom line, right? Like how much you're incurring on getting that single user, right? Now that is something again will be available with you. So those financial aspects associated with the social behavior and beneficiary, everything gets justified when which will be you will be yourself in a position to justify those, while the scientific aspects will have to have a third party agency, because only then you'll be able to go ahead with it. Yes.
Yeah. Just before we move to Jayanji's question, Aprajita, did you want to come in with a comment on the same point, or it's a separate?
I think let's take questions and yeah, on the same point, but I will add on once everyone is done. And I think we have one question in the chat box as well that we haven't.
Yeah. So Jayanji, would you like to come in? So Jayanji is the founder of Nature Connect India. They work with NTFP value chains.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I think Puru, your presentation is useful, but I think it is pretty standard one. If you look at the businesses that we're talking about, they have a pretty long timeline. In the sense, they are restoration linked businesses. So you will not see any economic returns before we cross 5 years timeline. That is the earliest, because that is, and when you mentioned that what is the return per rupee invested, I think in natural ecosystems there are aspects such as ecosystem services where markets have actually failed to. They have done the valuation, but nobody is ready to pay for that. For example, we save, let us say, 100 hectares of forest through certification, and it gives you a really good source of fresh water. It has got no value at this point. And that is what we need to understand, that there are very few things that we have been able to value, and where the market and those values can be linked to the markets. Because otherwise, pollination as an ecosystem service has been valued at $11 trillion. Nobody pays for keeping the forest standing. So I think we need to really understand that contradictions, that where markets have markets-based mechanisms are actually feasible option, and where are, actually we need to understand the limitations of markets. When we talk about, especially about, restoration linked, even I'm not talking about standing forest, which we work on, where the valuation, development and certification is, we can do that, deliver in 3 years max. So you can see the returns. But the point is that when you talk about additionality, you need to put something in ground. So that means you have to restore land so that, okay, we are doing this. Otherwise, the investor will say, okay, what are you doing so great? These forests were anyway standing, you just certify and link it to market. Where is the additionality? So I think these problems are very, very intricate. And we need to really take cognizance of that. What are we talking about when we promise any return to the investor? And we need to really see that whether they have, and I've been talking about the same for a long time, that we need to really have an alignment with the vision of the startup with the investor. Otherwise, there is these very standard questions of how do you measure impact and what you give, and retention and everything for all those products where they have not been even tried. For example, we have a lot of, I think at least 3 cohort members, the millet-based products. There is a lot of innovation taking place, but does not guarantee that all the products that have been developed by using millets will get market access. So I think we need to really understand that there are uncertainties, and those, how do we address those uncertainties, and how do we make the investor aware that this is what you are in for, not to the startups. Do not put the pressure on the startups because they're trying to do something good. They could do all this with philanthropic funding. I think there's no need for that. But we are trying to use the market-based mechanism so that there is some sustainability of this in financial sustainability, and then over the long term that you can make, let us say, 30 to 40% of returns coming from your business, and about 50 to 60% even still coming from the philanthropic support. Now coming back to the farming, I think Nagasai will agree. See, we have we are facing climate. One of the major challenges of anything which we're trying to do put in the ground, climate change is a major threat. Right now, how it is raining in the Western Ghats and area. Even if I don't wish it for anyone, because we are also putting a lot of things in the ground, they just get washed away. How do we count for those kind of uncertainties when we're looking at funding or investing in the restoration linked solutions or restoration linked startups?
Yeah.
I think I stopped it.
Yes. So uncertainties and market-related dynamics are something that is dependent upon the kind of businesses that we're operating in, right? What I'm trying to navigate with the impact framework and the baseline metrics is that when it happens, right? Uh, what are the basic things that we need to be keeping as metrics to capture? There are going to be a lot of qualitative aspects. There are going to be aspects, risks that you face in the ecosystem, which cannot be something that can be tracked as well, which is quite understandable, right? But what happens when those outcomes are being achieved and we're not communicating it right and we're not tracking it right so that it's not being pitched to the person in the way that they are understanding, right? That's why I pointed out those frameworks, right? You're talking all these risks, all these aspects around how a business can form are pretty standard. But what we're trying to also understand is that, and say for example, an ESG focused investor is going to be more inclined towards the metrics that are there forming part of the GRI, right? Like he would want to be looking at the outward impact aspect, and then the risks angle just feed into that, right? The market dynamics angle gets addressed in a separate conversation, right? But this is from a perspective of where it is measurable, right? What are the things that we can measure, and how can we devise a baseline, midline, endline that will actually show that some kind of journey is happening, some kind of impact metrics are being captured, because for all of the organizations on this in this session, we all have this aspect, that the intrinsic aspect, right, Jain, that you mentioned, that all our businesses have impact is a very intrinsic part of the business. Now, when the intrinsicality plays a role, uh, we need to have metrics to show that this is durable, right? It's actually intrinsic. It's not something that once the grand scaffolding comes and goes, it retains, and after that it goes. And now those kind of outcomes comes only when we actually start those tracking, and that is when that baseline comes into picture. That before our intervention, this was the state. After this is happening, and then the risk angle, the market structure, the business model aspects is a different conversation in itself. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just keeping an eye on time. So we'll take, before we move to Dr. Amrita, I'll just read the question from Jaspal from Gramya Ventures. Are there any organizations that conduct impact assessments on a voluntary or pro bono basis? We may want to come back on this, but yeah.
Okay. So it really depends on. I guess this can be like, I could share you details of some non-profits later. Like we could connect and take this forward, because this is done on a very whether it fits their thesis, whether it fits their program that they're doing, and then your innovation just helps them solve for the problem statement that they're trying to solve for, right? Can I know which organization this is?
This is Gramya Ventures, so they work in the merit value chain.
Okay, yeah.
We can probably connect you with Puru after the session and take this forward. I think.
Thanks.
Yeah. Dr. Amrita from Arogyam wanted to come in. Before that, just want to quickly check in with Divya or Rajita if any points relevant to our current discussion. Yeah.
Comment. Thanks, Ananya. Thanks, everyone. So just a quick comment on what Jayanti asked, and I think this is an important question, and we've also sort of tackled this in different sessions of ours. So thank you, Puru, for answering this. I agree that what we are trying to do, I think, through this session is, when you are already delivering impact, how do we measure it, right? How do we measure the progress? How do we report progress? How do we tell the story? what are the kind of right indicators, what is the overall approach, right? And we are not going to get into details of how do you design a research, right? That's not the objective of the session, but really what the market is looking for, what is relevant for your business. So this is really the scope of this discussion, right? But having said that, even if for example, what we have seen with enterprises like NTFP related enterprises or other restoration linked enterprises, what we have seen is that it always helps to first do your research, right? So it's very, very important which investor you're approaching. Because if there's somebody who already understands what the timeline is going to be for that enterprise, right, for the economic outcomes to start coming up, your job is half done, right? They already know what it's going to be, when the progress is going to be reported, when the actual returns are going to be reported, when is the right time to start asking for every dollar return, right? So every dollar invested or every rupee invested, what is the kind of return? Right. So one is doing the right research, going to the right funders, and that's a separate topic. It's not relevant to this, but I thought let me just quickly touch upon that. One is that the other thing is what we've seen again from experience is it really helps if you gather the right kind of examples, right? So even if you don't find the right investor right away, it always helps to have the relevant examples. And thankfully, the stage that we are in, there are actually sufficient examples of very well, enterprises who've actually, like ours, right, restoration linked enterprises, not just from India, but from other global context as well, that have actually done well economically, right? They've raised money, they have, actually done well in creating the impact, right? So having that research ready to present that as a story, or at least add that to the story that you're going to take to the investor, that look, there has been precedents, right? There have been organizations like ours who've done this, who've raised money, who brought in this kind of return. But I can only bring this to you after 3 years or 5 years, right? But that's the typical journey. And sometimes educating the investors is as important as educating ourselves, right? And this is something that is incumbent in all of us to do, because of the challenges that we understand, right, on all sides. So I think these are some of the practical learnings from the other enterprises that we've worked with. And it's an ongoing thing. And in India, it really needs a lot of work. It still needs a lot of education, awareness. And many of us are doing it in our own capacity, right? But I think what I've seen, this really helps, right? So it's basically finding ways to induce investor confidence, right? How do you make them confident? You show them trends, you show them, other examples. You tell them that, look, this is what I'm doing. So for example, leading indicators, right? These are the indicators that I'm measuring today, but this is my plan for the next 6 to 12 months. This is my plan for the next 3 months, right? So that's another way to bring in confidence, that I may not have your per dollar return today, but I will show it to you after 3 years. Right. And all these are practical strategies. We've actually seen them work now. And I'm sure, many of you might also be acquainted with that. So just wanted to come in with that. Back to you, Anand. Thanks.
Thanks, Divya. I'll go to Dr. Amrita next. If possible to keep the questions a little brief, we can come back to them a little later. I want to leave enough time for Raj to cover her content as well. So,
Thank
Dr.
you, Puru, for your presentation. And thank you, Divya, also for the comment that educating the investor is also important. That was really necessary. Yeah. And my question is that given the soil health improvements are long-term outcomes, so which metrics do you think would the investor consider more meaningful for evaluating the impact, scalability, than the commercial value of a soil testing device during the early years of deployment?
Yes. So one thing that is right away that comes out is that whether your reports are being acted upon, right? We've had programs in which we've worked with lifted soil testing solutions. What happens is that the soil testing happens, the report comes out. The farmer doesn't know what to do after that. So he goes back to the same thing that's happening, right? So the whole, whether he's acting upon the report that is being provided, and then the whole translation of whether after acting upon is it actually leading to him benefit, that comes later. So at the initial stage, right, one thing is to ensure that whether he's acting upon it, and that could take different proxies, right? Now, one thing is that, say, for example, you're recommending it lacks, like, say, nitrogen or phosphorus, like multiple parameters on which different suggestions can come out. Now, what happens is that sometimes the farmer doesn't know either they don't have access to the right thing, or it's either really costly, or either they provide for inputs that they don't have to, right? So maybe after that, you could check on what were the things that you actually reduced on using, what did you actually use more, because that will eventually affect his productivity and yields, right? And that is like a end of season question. So one thing right away is to do this, and then there are multiple proxies that can come into picture as well. So we can dive deep into that as well. So I would like to like talk on this in much detail, because we work on soil testing, digital advisory, and like talking to, like, I think we talked like 4,000 farmers across like 8 states, and we try to gather, is it going to work, is it not going to work, are you going to go ahead to the retailer, buy, where are you facing problem in that journey, right? So based upon that, we have devised some metrics as well. And one thing right away is that utilization and acting upon it takes time, and if we could build proxies for that, because I think everyone, like, as a person who's working in this area, you yourself know, right? Like, what are those proxies, right? If there's certain things that are like abundance, then he's not supposed to use it, right? And that could be proxies. And we go ahead with proxies to justify. And that is what I keep telling again and again, right? We don't need the final outcome for the financial to be interested in you. We just need to know that different kinds of financiers who because all our metrics need to serve them, right? Eventually, it has to serve our business to get more money or build right partners or something. Now, what happens is that there are different kinds of financials. Now, some would value your impact more, some would value returns more, right? Now, how much they want to like discount one, each of it plays a bigger role. So in that journey, the what metric plays a role, and if we even have these basics, they become signal in all your pitches, right? Even if your outcome has not been achieved, even if your productivity and your income enhancement aspect is still under question, and they just have estimates around how much this could potentially be, they're saying that, you know
It's
what,
over
as of
time.
this day, we have these proxies as a business outcome, and this serves as a signal that it will work out or not work out. And then they could take a call on that. Those proxies play a very bigger role, and yeah.
Yeah, Aprajita, if you wanted to come in now.
Yeah, I will come in, and Mahesh, if possible, you could put your question on chat, because I think a large part of the questions will also be addressed during by Raj during her session, including the question on sampling to an extent. But just adding a note on that, like Divya said as well, and I think maybe we've spoken of this in previous sessions during the onboarding workshop as well, in the panel discussion, if you all recall, that we had with Rini, Ruchika, that it's important not to fixate over research-backed methods or statistical rigor at the level that we are at. For very large populations, we know statistically, because I do know that we do have some of us are academics here who have switched over as practitioners and started their own enterprises, that statistically representative estimates are at 95% confidence with a plus minus 5% margin of error. So you generally need around 380 respondents that are there for very large populations, right? So most early stage startups don't need this level of precision. Maximum level of precision with a small customer base, let's say 150 to 300 farmers, like Puru also mentioned, is about 20 to 50 would suffice at a pilot or proof of concept stage, wherein 30 is a very good number, right? And with 150 to 300 farmers, it would be, if you survey 30 to 50% of the population, you can opt for a census as well. Again, it's something you take as a founder at an enterprise level. Early stage startups, 50 to 100 is a good number, where you can identify trends, collect stories, and generate directional evidence. Mature impact evaluation definitely can go towards statistically robust estimates, and external reporting may also become necessary, wherein funding will come in, which is a very, very important question that we had from one of the enterprises, that where do we get the funding for it? And I think investors do understand that impact assessment at that scale is a funding intensive exercise. So let's all be very conscious of this understanding within the ecosystem as well. General process, of course, is defining your universe or population. In this case, would be your complete customer base. Also important to do stratifications, which you all must already been doing, right? Geography, different customer categories that is there, of the customer segment, what is your intervention group, what basis your customer penetration, and then we go into sampling techniques. Again, level of rigor comes in at a later stage. Basis the stratifications that you do, you will also know which population groups are able to deduce these findings for, right? Where do these findings hold true, and which scenarios these assumptions will be valid for. We'll go back again to a few basic things to refer to. This is the onboarding workshop, right? This must also be available as one of the SM posts, the social media posts that we put out, from Ruchika and Rini session, that clear and transparent sampling approach, consistency in measurement over time of select indicators. Not everything needs to be measured. Then also evidence that the sample represents different user segments which are relevant for your enterprise, and you would be the best person to define that for your enterprise, and investors do trust that, right? And most importantly and lastly is honest reporting of limitations. And one of the limitations, like Nagasai mentioned, right, is the limitation of self-reported data that we have, right? And recall factor of some of our customers as well, given that we do work with emergent and vulnerable populations. And this is again something that is an understanding in the ecosystem. On voluntary organizations doing research studies, again, like Puru said, that rigorous impact measurement can be expensive and resource intensive. And an approach that I have witnessed is agricultural universities, research organizations, finding PhD scholars who are interested in the problem that your enterprise is working to solve, is something that we can do as a group, and that is something that you can always put out. But yeah, those were some thoughts that I wanted to share before we go on forward to Raj's part of the session. Mahesh will definitely come back to your question, and if you could put it on the chat box, we'll make sure that it's addressed by Raj as part of her session as well. So I'm going to request Payal to just present the slides for Raj's convenience. Over to you, Raj. Thanks again for making time.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I would like to thank WRI LA team and Villgro to invite me for this talk. And as Puru already set the stage and discussed some of the monitoring framework and KPI related to different efforts, I will just continue with it. Giving some of the examples of real life cases, what we experienced in the fields, why monitoring is important, and what are the best practices. In the end, we'll discuss a framework you can practice for yourself for doing monitoring better. So I think before we start, I think I want to make a statement, or you can say a confession. So for years, landscape restoration's favorite photo has been same one. A person, a sapling, a shovel, a smile, tree planted, job done. And that's about it. Except no one ever posts the 6-month follow-up. The one where you go back and, well, half of the saplings that have been planted are dead. So that's what today is about. Not planting trees, but proving they lived. This session called the Monitoring for Real World Impact. And over the next few minutes, I want to walk you through why monitoring isn't the paperwork we do after the real work is done. It is the real work. We will cover baselines, midlines, end lines, how we manage all the data, how it all turns into a story that actually unlocks funding. Next slide, please. Thank you, Payal. So why does monitoring matters this much? So here's a simple way to think about it. A regular health checkup. As we age, our bodies change and the problems build up quietly without us noticing. So we go for checkups, we run some tests, and that tells us two things: where we are starting from and what is the actual issue, what the actual issue is. The first result becomes our baseline. This is the number we keep coming back to measure everything against. Once we know the issue, we act on it. We change our diet, start exercising, adjust our lifestyles, and we don't just stop there. We go back for a follow-up checkup to see if those changes are actually helping or if things are getting worse. So we know whether to keep going or change our course, right? So restoration works exactly the same way. We check land conditions monitoring works the same way. We go and check the land conditions. We establish a baseline. We take actions to fix what's wrong and keep checking it over time to see if what we are doing is actually working or whether we need to adjust our approach. Now, monitoring does three things for us. It helps us adapt and improve. It catches a problem in real time before they become expensive disasters. It proves impact. It helps us move from we did stuff to here's what survived, here's the carbon, and here's the biodiversity. It builds trust. Transparent data tells donors and partners that we're not just telling you a nice story. We can show you a receipt of the action we have done. So monitoring isn't something that you do at the end of a project. It's something that is integral part of the project from beginning to the end and beyond. Next slide, please. So for monitoring, there are two main goals that we look into. So here's something people often miss. Monitoring isn't just one thing, it's two different jobs done at once. The first is internal, that we call an adaptive management. This is us quietly asking ourselves, are we doing the things right? Is the science and operation team watching real-time data and doing course corrections eagerly? Now it's like checking your own bathroom scale and your weight every single day, right? To understand whatever you're doing as a lifestyle change or eating habit change is actually causing like an impact or a change in your weight. You don't need to say that to anyone external. You just need to know what's happening, and it is an internal thing, and nobody else needs to see that. You change your course of action based on the internal monitoring, and then you see if the things are actually working for you or working against you, and you change your course of action. Now the second is the external part. This is where the accountability comes in. So this is the version for the outside world. Did we do what we promised? This is the question that we ask. So this is one, in this one needs to be transparent and investor grade. Think of it as an annual appraisal, except the person who's reviewing your appraisal controls your organization's funding. Now, both aspects are really, really important, and both of them matter. So if you skip the internal one, you find out about the problems too late, and you cannot fix it later on. And if you skip the external one, nobody trusts you enough to fund the next phase. Together, they build a long-term sustainability and trust. Now, we have faced something similar with RHB, like the Restore for Harit Bharat. So WRI India has been responsible for monitoring project performance on behalf of our partners and funders, working across 20 plus implementing organizations. So after we were dividing the the funds into two tranches, right? So after the first tranche of the project and the first year completion, a clear pattern emerged in how different organizations are actually performing. So I'll give you a different scenario. There are three scenarios here actually. So one organization reports look impressive on paper. Okay, and we went for ground verification. And the ground verification revealed they had significantly misinterpreted their efforts. As a result, we suspended their funding for the next year, and they did not get a second tranche. There have been other organizations. The second scenario was several organizations did reasonable work, but didn't fully deliver on what they committed to, or their efforts fell short on the bar. For these, once the project is once the project concludes, we won't be extending any further funding for future work. Now, this is not all doom and gloom. There are few organizations that delivered excellent results, and for them, we helped secure additional funding beyond this project so they could continue their good work. So the only way to know how each organization has to truly performed was through rigorous monitoring, like critically reading their reports, conducting ground validations. This is both a responsibility we hold towards the environment and a commitment to the funders who trusted us to deliver real impact with the money they invested. Next slide, please. So now, if monitoring matters this much, why doesn't anyone just do it well? Let's be honest. The challenges is because they are systematic and not personal failures. So some of the challenges that we experience while doing monitoring, like for example, there is a filled staff gap. The person collecting the data is often doing their best with a form, a patchy phone signal. He's not a trained scientist, or she is not a trained scientist. Naturally, that leads to data inconsistency. Numbers and data inconsistency. The numbers across the reports don't match because without a standard template, everyone's playing like a broken telephone. We all have had this game when you were a child. By the time the message reaches the last person, like for example, the 10 saplings survived near the river bank becomes a totally different statement, like tender snacks arrived at the river bank. So multiply that across 20 organizations and 4 reporting cycles, and now you see the problem. Then there's high turnover. Every time a trained field officer leaves, it's like changing the Wi-Fi password without telling half the house. Someone's always logged out and you are explaining the basics all over again. Also, there is on the technical side, like weak respiration literacy. Like when I'm talking about for-profit organizations also, the staff that you're working with need to understand the whole framework of the organizations, the terms that you're using. They should be not just the ground level staff, but also the not the upper management, but also the ground level staff needs to be aware of all the terminologies, of all the processes that are involved. Um, like we generally count trees, it's easy, but not because counting trees actually proves restoration effort has been done. Now there is a gap between activity and outcome tracking also. We record what we do, but we do not actually take those, we do not actually see what those actions have lead to. So we're just saying one part of your actions, but what your actions is resulting, we are never going and checking it or measuring it. And finally, the big one, no baseline, no proof. Without knowing where you started, you cannot prove where you went anywhere, even if you did. So baseline assessment is a must for any sort of project because you cannot validate your change until you know where you started. Next slide, please. So these are all the issues that we have with, like, general issues that there are there with monitoring. So how do we fix this? So with a simple 3-point structure, we can fix it. Think of it as like a fitness journey. Like a baseline is the day one, the before photo. You record where things stand, ecological conditions, socioeconomic conditions, and set your target, right? And then you have midline. Midline is checking in. So okay, sorry, I had to say another thing. Baseline is also one thing that is varying between organizations. One organization's baseline would not be same for the second organization's baseline, right? And baseline depends on which KPI you're looking into. So baseline would be the KPI first year's value that you measured. Then with the coming years, you keep on getting KPI values for different aspects. So it depends on the KPI that you're using, right? Now comes a midline. So midline is the check in a year around 2 or 3, like stepping on the scale midway through a plan. You are not yet done, but you can already tell if you are on track or need to adjust. This is why you catch problems while there's still time and budget to fix them. This is the place where you assess your current progress with targets that you set, analyze how far you have come from the baseline, and how far you need to go, and the time limit for it. This is why you take action based on your requirement. And finally, the end line. End line is the final reveal, the after photo. You measure total change, compare it with the baseline, and package it into an investor grade proof. Now, here's one line I want you to remember. Without a baseline, no change can ever be proven, even if it is a real change. This is the difference saying I got fitter and having no photo, no weight, no record from the day one to back it up. Nobody just takes your word for it. Okay, next slide. I think I thought of first asking questions from everyone between the slide, between the presentations, but I think I'll just leave it for the last session. Okay. So all this data has to travel, like whatever data you're collecting throughout the years has to travel from a muddy field in a village to a polished donor report. The journey is the data flow, and it has 5 steps. Generally, I'm saying not always the case, but generally it has got a 5-step. So there would be field data collection, there would be aggregation and entry, then there would be quality checks. People sometimes make a central dashboard, then they convert data into a donor facing report. So all this step, think of it like a relay race. Every runner can run perfectly, but if one person drops the baton, a paper form left out in the rain, or maybe a form eaten by termites, it does happen. The whole race is lost, no matter how well everyone has run. So that's why we need 4 things working together, right? While we're doing monitoring, there should be a standardized template. So numbers don't turn into number soup. A central repository, data repository is required where all records are saved. So records aren't scattered across 40 phones and notebooks. Field staff capacity. So you often need to train your field staff. A simple mobile tool and regular training need to be done. So people aren't fighting the tool while they are supposed to be observing the forest. Then there is the most important one, a verification protocol. So independent spot checks, because you need to trust, but yet verify. So I'll give you a real life example here. So some of our colleagues from WRI India were sent for a field verification for one of our champions. So the Restore for Harit Bharat project requires the organizations to visit the site where the plantation is being done, take photograph of the plantation, capture lat-long coordinates along the plantation boundary. So one such staff member from the champion did submit all the required data, right? However, during our ground validation visit, we found that the location he had tagged at the site of a massive plantation was actually in the courtyard of someone's house, right smack in the middle of the village. When we questioned the accompanying staff from the implementing organization, it became clear that the person assigned to tag the sapling had not done so without visiting the actual field, simply sitting in a courtyard and logging fabricated coordinates. Now, scenarios like this can cost an organization its credibility, all because of one grassroots level staff who didn't take their work seriously. And if the organization itself isn't checking on how its staffs are performing their duties or keeping proper oversight, it ultimately raises questions about the credibility and integrity of the organization as a whole. Next slide, please. So now here's where it all comes together, turning data into a story that actually moves people. So picture two ways of describing an exactly same project. So for version 1, we say we planted 1,000 trees. It's an activity, easy to count, easy to put on a banner. And honestly, it tells funder nothing, almost nothing. It's a resume line that says responsible for planting trees. Great, but anyone can do it. There's nothing special you are doing. Now, the same project as a version 2, we can say 900 trees alive at year 2, a 90% survival rate, carbon sequestration quantified, biodiversity change documented. Now, that's an outcome. That's the resume line that says achieve 90% survival, independently verified. That's the version that get you the next round of funding. The first version is incomplete. Funders want proof. The second is fundable because donors invest in proven results and not just good intentions. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, when we're looking for donors, why donors care about monitoring? Let's flip the perspective for a second to why do donors care about all this so much? I'll give you 6 reasons, and they all boil down to one thing: trust with receipts, right? So there is anti-greenwashing protection. So verified data protects donors from being accused of funding a pretty photo instead of a real change. Accountability in terms of using the funds. Donors answer to their own boards. They need proof the money did what it was supposed to. It also provides, monitoring also provides evidence for the next funding. Your monitoring data becomes a pitch deck for the next round of funding. Also provides learning and portfolio value. Your data helps donors get smarter across their whole portfolio, not just your one project. Unlocking climate finance, verified carbon and biodiversity numbers are entry ticket to carbon credit, green bonds, and ESG instruments. So once you don't have any verification, you don't get any ticket. Then comes a long-term partnership. Organizations that monitor rigorously are the ones donors keep coming back to. It's like a credit score. Nobody hands you a big loan just because you ask them nicely. They check for your credit history, right? So next slide, please. So for the next, for the bottom line, let's bring it all together. Monitoring drives smarter operations through real-life adaptive management. It builds donor confidence with transparent, verifiable outcomes. It unlocks the next generation of climate finance, carbon credits, green bonds, ESG capitals, and it turns field work into an impact narrative that actually moves people to act. So here's one sentence I would like to leave with. Monitoring is not a cost center. It is a foundation of a long-term sustainability and trust. And that's it from my end. And thank you all. I'll pass it to Aparajita for the next slides.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Raj. So the last slide that is there on this presentation before we go into Q&A is that, as you know, that we rolled out a baseline survey with the cohort members earlier in March, and we took about a month to complete it. We're going to have the midline survey now rolled out to see how we've fared as we come to the end of the first phase of the program, which is the core capacity building session, of which the last session will be next week. So with the midline survey, being rolled out, we thought it would be good that in this session itself that we have on impact measurements, its importance, how to do it, and what are some pointers for it, to also discuss some of the key observations from the cohort level baseline responses and the feedback that was there for everyone's learning. So some of the observations that were there, which could be pointers as we navigate the midline survey process as well, is that we saw that there was a lot of missing or incomplete information. So this included, basic questions being answered as to the designation of the respondent, village or block level geography. Now, wherever village or block level geography, we made some actually tweaks in the baseline survey survey as well, where basis the feedback that we got from you all, wherein wherever village or any information that is not available, feel free to just mention the extent of that information that can be shared. So if you have about 150 villages wherein you have your intervention, it's okay. It's not expected that you share the entire details of the 150 villages. You can just mention 150 villages and how they're distributed across blocks or districts, right? This time along, of course, we've kept the information to district level interventions itself for the ease of your reference. But going forward, whenever information is requested, it's always a good idea to put in something which makes sense to whoever is reading or conducting the survey, right? Then again, incomplete information that we saw on the targets or the expectations that were there from the program, confusing knowledge proficiency with confidence levels. So those are some pointers wherein it's just required to maybe read a question carefully before responding, and experience with different types of capitals, partnership details. So these were just some questions where we noted that we had incomplete or missing information. Excuse me. Questions with multiple subparts were also not fully addressed. So for your ease of reference, what we've done is that we've these clustered questions, we've unclustered them at this point of time. We divided them into different subparts, so they're hard to miss. But while we're happy to do that, because this is at the end of the day a learning exercise that we have in this close group, where we are very much invested in how each one of the enterprises fares going forward. Investors or other partners that you work with in the future may not be able to accommodate that level of leniency, right? So going forward, it's always a good idea just to read, clarify with the stakeholders that you're working with, and unavailable information can always be mentioned explicitly. So feel free to mention that this information is not being captured, instead of coming up with proxies where they may not be required. Like we spoke, earlier in the session as well. It's understood that not everything is being tracked or it needs to be tracked. For every enterprise, tracking is going to look differently of indicators. So it's a very common understanding within the sector. Just make sure to mention it explicitly. Data inconsistencies, I think, were pointed out earlier as well in different, kind of group and one-on-one calls that we had, wherein, let's say, the species-wise tree data was not matching with the total figures that were there. The total number of people benefited from the interventions lacked clear distinction and alignment. Variations were observed across, different impact metrics that were there, which on which, detailed feedback was given to each cohort member in the Excel sheets that they had, and also as part of emails and phone calls that we have. The most important thing is, of course, clarity on estimates and methodologies. It's important to support all estimates with explanations. The basis for reporting these figures should be reported, and methodology or assumptions wherever they are present, which might be implicit and obvious for you as an enterprise, may not be that obvious for any external reader, because you are the expert of your own work as a founder, right? So just making sure that that's clearly explained wherever you're writing is always a good way to go about with things. So with that, we come to an end, and I'm going to open the floor for questions for Raj. Yeah, we can stop presenting now. Thank you so much, Payal. Maheshji, do you want to go have the first question? Since I think you were parking it for later onwards. Maheshji, can you hear us?
Yeah, yes. So yeah, uh, uh, we are uh, we are working on the millet value chain. So I have a question for the regarding that one. Can we design any carbon credit tools for to millets crop? So is there any tool right now is available in the market? Yeah, if we want to do the some develop the uh, tool, so how we can do that one? Yeah, from that tool, can we generate the revenue also? Because I gone through the many reports and many websites. Although I did not get any tools. So is there any tool in the market so we can use that one? Because right now we have a development application, so we are collecting the data from the farmers and we are tracking their field and everything. So can we align that tool with the whatever right now we are collecting the data, so we will get some revenue also that one. So that just I want to understand your thoughts on this one.
Who do you want me to answer this? Okay.
Yeah,
So
anyone can.
okay, so we actually look into carbon credit for plantation, for like tree-based plantation. Mostly I don't work right now in carbon credits for agriculture, but I do know there are standards there that discuss carbon credits for agriculture. I would say that right now I don't have the knowledge of this as much as I would like to, but yes, I can take up your question and see what I can help you out with.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, just adding on to that, yes, I think there's no millet specific tool. There are, LCA's life cycle assessment that can be done. And there are tools for GHG emission mitigations that are there, standards like Raj also referred to. We have gold standards, we have BERA. But millet specific tools is something that we'll have to look into, and I think we'll do that kind of research and be able to come back to you with Raj's support. But yeah, if anybody else has any response to that question, please do come in. Sure, Nagasai, followed by Dr. Namrata.
Yeah, just on millet specific, as such, it is on land use case basically. So generally, you do anything with the land, like example, afforestation is also land use case only. You are planting trees, then you get a little bit of carbon sequestration. I think just specific to millets, Maheshji, I think you have to prove your baseline with something that the emissions are much more. As in, you are converting a rice farmer to millet, then maybe you get a better carbon credit because of the delta. Otherwise, millet specific, then you have to prove that with the package of practices around millet, you have to prove that maybe before my intervention, the emissions, urea utilization or fertilizer utilization, those emissions are generally higher. Maybe with my intervention with the seed variety or the practices change in the millets, I'm able to get better this one. I think those are the sort of activities that is there. And none of the methodologies will generally be very specific to crops because they generally talk about carbon removal as such in the land activity. So you have to prove SOC increment with whatever you do in agriculture. So at least when you're talking about agriculture specific, not afforestation, all of them. So anything that you're able to prove SOC improvement with delta change of emission reductions, so broadly those methodologies will be for that. Now you can fit into any crop as such and prove it, but that's where the things are basically.
Yes, thanks, Naga. I will connect with you for that.
Moving forward to Namrata, followed by Janji.
Yeah, I had a question for Rajasweta. For monitoring, is there a standard for how often the monitoring needs to be done? Should it be done once a year, once in 6 months? Is there a standard for it, or it differs from company to company?
Not exactly company to company. It differs based on the KPI that you're choosing. Like some of the KPIs require regular monitoring. Like we generally do monitoring of number of people who got a job or a work day analysis. We do it every 6 months. But then again, if you are looking for monitoring for carbon, like tree-based carbon sequestration takes years. So we have a baseline. Then again, we do it maybe after 5 or 6 years when the trees have enough grown and they have enough foliage. So it depends on the KPI, that what KPI you're choosing and how many times does it require for you to measure it. So yeah.
Janji.
Yeah, so my question is to Nagasai. I mean, this is because this is very complex. I mean, I'm referring to this millet as an opportunity for, basically linking millet production with carbon credits mechanism. How do you, when you're saying that, for example, if you're substituting or replacing rice fields into uh, changing into millets, how do you measure the impact in terms of, for example, the rice obviously is a major methane emitter in addition to consuming a lot of urea. So are there any standards which really account, because otherwise converting that into carbon is a separate exercise in itself. And how do you standardize that? Because each farmer has a different way of looking at his rice field, and people really, for in the name of yield, they use so much of a urea that there's no standard unit. So how do you address that complexity on ground when you really want to get maximum credits for good practices such as millets?
So I think it was a question for Nagasai, right?
Yeah,
but,
it was. You can also answer. I mean,
okay.
Yeah, I
it
think
was a
generally,
question. I
yeah,
mean, I think you can also answer. It's not that.
yeah.
Okay.
The MRV, I think. Sorry, yes, I'll come. Uh, the monitoring system for this especially kind of it falls under region agriculture, so
Okay.
has to be very dynamic. So as such, at least in India, none of the credits for region agriculture has been issued, largely because of same reasons, like how do you prove things, right? Like what is my baseline, what is my current actual reports. So
Exactly.
that science is still in progress, but the MRV, the simplest, the good thing was MRV has to be dynamic. It can't be like self-reported. I used urea 20 kgs and now I
Exactly. I
only
mean,
have
that's
used
that. Yeah.
well,
So
yeah.
that was
So
my,
those
yeah.
things are still in being consideration, and those are very complex MRV systems, as in terms of reporting, data collection, all of that, and that has to be satellite linked, self-reporting, ground sensors, like multiple ways. There is no standard way in which you measure it, so it has to be coming from multiple sources to uh, interpret it and tell, okay, this is a single source that I am verifying upon. But as such, the still work in progress in those cases. Except for methane, rice at least is a little bit standardized, but rest of the crops are still being done.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So Rajeshweta, you have any additions to make? I mean,
No, actually, regarding methane and rice, I did some research for some of our team members who are working in the produce team. So there are standard like devices that has been implemented on the fields that actually check on methane emissions throughout the rice cycle. So that's how they measure the methane gas emissions. And I think IRRI has been doing a massive project with World Bank in Kerala, where they're looking into the CH4 emissions and like N2O emissions in the rice fields and Kerala actually. So I think there would be some of the case studies that you can also have a look at to understand this better, how they have done this whole project involving multiple farmers throughout different regions while they're monitoring their emissions.
I would just like to add one thing. As Nagasa had pointed out, MRV is like very crucial when it comes to like either the millet value chain or even because the whole point is the whole soil organic carbon content, right? So from that perspective, I would just like for people to just check out. So Vera has this agricultural land management, that whole process of how to go about with it and how to this would address Mahesh point also. So that's why we pointed that out in the frameworks, because yeah, exactly. So the VM0042, yes. So I would just suggest people to like look at that and see how that fits. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have a question from Dr. Manisha from Open Field in the chat box. I'll just read it out. How can we design the reporting loop so that data does not only move upward for funder compliance, but also flows back to communities and field teams as practical intelligence on prices or quality, harvesting pressure, and income, so that the same system strengthens local decision making, trust, and ownership? I think both of you can take this.
I can give an example of this thing. So monitoring some of the aspects, like maybe just give you an example of water stress. So if someone is doing some sort of work that is related to water related or soil water conservation, they always go and monitor the water stress and also the soil moisture values. They can do it regularly. So at times this, I'm not talking about here in India, but I'm just giving a random example. So suppose there are devices that have been developed for a large scale soil moisture estimation regularly. So this thing is being monitored, and this data is also being shared with the local community who plan their irrigation and also look after their agricultural farms based on this data. So someone else is doing the monitoring, but they are also still giving the community the information that they have collected, so they can change some of the processes that they are involved with. Similarly, like someone is working with soil, what is it, soil health. So you are measuring soil data from various locations. You can share that soil data with the community as well. They can also go ahead and change, like help you make the changes. And also once they're doing it, they're also increasing their soil health basically. So this can be something that can be reported to donors, saying that the soil health was this parameters were low, and after some time, like what we have done with the work, the parameters have gone better. So this also helps with the decision making of the community coming together to help improve the soil health. At the same time, you get the numbers that you can show that your efforts are actually working.
I'll maybe move to the next question from Suraj from millets now. So, how can we measure the impact for water save from millets cultivation in comparison with other staple crops?
Okay, there's a lot of millet questions here. Okay. I would say that having a baseline is always important. I think having the initial understanding of how many liters of water have been used in the initial practices when the implementation started would be something that you can have as a baseline. Then after some time, when your practices have already started happening, like what was the water usage then? So this is one thing that you can look into. You can also look at the current water sources available, how much you're dependent on the groundwater sources, or how much you're dependent on the surface water sources. Ideally, we would like that we can comply all our work with the surface water and not be too much dependent on the groundwater sources as well. So yeah, you can always need to have a baseline. Also check on the sources you are getting the water from and how much you have been using it. Yeah, Nagasai, please go ahead.
Generally, that I think assuming that baseline is there, and if we actually do the proper measurement and all, it comes out that maybe it is still at a baseline after our interventions, all of it is still at a baseline, or it is still much worse than baseline. Maybe in example, water consumption has gone up. Then if we report to the donors all of it, will they be able to tell you, okay, maybe because in net the negative impact, right? We started with that कि baseline ये होना चाहिए, but वो आगे बढ़ गया. So generally reporting happens as such, and donors still accept that, and will the project will still go on. Although I'm just asking a scenario.
Are you going to the donor with an assumption like that
Assumption
your
like having
activity will reduce the like the water usage, right? So
yeah.
see, we, like, I don't know like about other organization, but at times in RHB also we find that the impact that we're looking for doesn't work the same way that we expected it. It's always very random. It's also because sometimes what happens if there is a drought, there would be more water consumption that is happening from the groundwater sources. So there are a lot of inconsistency and lot of what to say that variables that act on. Not always what you have given them as a what to say that as a target can be achieved, because a lot of things factors that come in randomly. So maybe we have said that okay, 1,000 trees would be planted, but by the end of the project you saw that there was nothing there. 80% of the saplings died. Why? It's not your fault. There was a drought there. So there are certain inconsistencies that happens. But if the donor will fund you, I think Divya would be a better person to answer it, because she knows from the donor perspective. I'm the data person, so I think she'll be able to answer it. But yes, we don't always get the numbers that we
Yeah, I
target
meant
for.
the honest reporting, as in if we do in such a way, then will the overall ecosystem accept? And otherwise, it's always then I always will keep a lower baseline.
No, to be honest, we have got like organizations who have worked where there have been negative impact or the impact that we thought didn't happen. But through monitoring, you have to be what to say that truthful to your funders also, letting them know that if something didn't work out, why. And I'm pretty sure it does help them understand the situation and it doesn't impact your what is it, your credibility, because you have actually given them the right reason of what happened and the true picture. But rather than lying to them or changing numbers based on your like making it look better, I think the hard truth always pays off.
Yeah.
Divya, do you want to add?
No, I think what you've said, Raj, is complete. And I mean, just sort of reiterating what I had said earlier, Nagasai, that, it really depends on the kind of funders, right? So what we have seen is that funders who are actually primed, right? They understand, they've started learning about the ecosystem. They understand these are realistic challenges, right? So, I mean, it really depends again on what is the funder awareness and, the risks. But when we say that there is a certain risk perception attached, this is exactly what it entails, right? So it's not something. And what we've another sort of a practical thing that we've seen also that works is that when you start conversations, it's always useful to sort of preempt some of these challenges that you see coming, right? So it may never happen, but it's always good to sort of start with it, because then, I mean, that's where the investor awareness building comes in, right? And people are sort of prepared that if something is going to happen, then this is something that I'm prepared for, right? So that is actually, in some conversations we have seen that really helps as well. Yeah, that's just my 2 cents on this. And I also would like to just maybe I make a quick comment on Dr. Manisha's comment. I mean, this is a very useful question, Dr. Manisha, and thank you for bringing this up. Very, very valuable. That monitoring is not, and I hope we've also conveyed this today in this session, that this is not just about compliance, right? Whether funder compliance or in general any kind of compliance, but it's really, when we say it is part of the process, right? Part of the impact that we are creating. What it also means is that this is informing what we do and how we do it better going forward, right? And of course, because what we do is not something that we are doing without communities, right? Without the participation of communities or field teams, right? They are an intrinsic part of the work that we do. So therefore, the information flow to all of these stakeholders is as important as it is to, for this information to flow to funders, right? And something, again, going by a few examples that we've seen, what we've seen is, we've seen organizations, for example, they share data that they collect, right? So an organization working with multiple FPOs, the data that they collect across FPOs, how they consolidate it and maybe come together once a year, twice a year for reflections, is also something that we have seen really works here. Even in the case of some of the initiatives that we run, we try to bring all our cohort members together and share information with them, right? So those are some of the practical ways in which this works. But thank you for bringing this up. This is very valuable.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Divya. I think if we have no more questions, we can proceed towards the end of the session. Thank you, first of all, to the cohort members. I know it's late in the Friday evening, and for all the energy and all the engagement. We thought this would be an exciting session, given how interested everyone was in it. And we thank you for bringing the energy, the questions. It's made it one of the most engaging sessions I think we've had till date. Secondly, a huge shout out to the Villgro team for making sure that the session goes on today. Ananya, Purushotham, Anil, Feira, everyone, thank you so much for taking care of the session today in spite of the challenges that we had. With that, and of course, thank you, Raj. Sorry for taking you for granted since you're a part of the team itself.
Yeah,
But thank you
always
so
happy
much,
to be
Raj.
granted.
So yeah, with that, I think I'm going to ask Purushotham and Rajasweta, you're free to, drop off the session. We can stop the recording, and after that, let's proceed to. Oh, sorry, we need. I'm so sorry, Payal. We need everyone to turn on their camera for the screenshot for the social media post. If everybody could just turn on their videos for a moment. Mahesh, I understand you're at the session, but if possible, if you could go to a corner and turn on your video, we'd like to have everyone for the social media post. Siba. Okay, Pal, you can just go ahead with the team members that we have. Abhishek. Done. Okay, great. Thank you, Purushottam and Rajasweta once again.
Aparajita, I would like to answer one question that was there. How can we measure the increase in farmers' income resulting to project interventions? So we actually do that. We do it in two ways. One is direct beneficiaries and indirect beneficiaries. So anyone who gets a job because of the intervention is one of the direct beneficiaries, and like have an income because of the intervention. Like example, sapling plantation. If someone is involved with the plantation work, they are the direct beneficiaries. Now then comes indirect beneficiaries. Like if someone has like a farm pond being created in their farm area, and because of that they have started doing fishery in that farm and then in that pond, so they have got an increase. So that is an indirect beneficiary of our interventions. So you can measure it in two ways.
Okay. I was also going to just touch upon the last two questions. So one thing is on the lines of the increase in farmer income. Of course, there's direct and indirect, but on the lines of how do you actually go about it, I would really suggest to have like those cost proxies and those income enhancement proxies. So cost could be like what are those parameters on which the cost is reduced, because that could be a lot of things, and then you align it with your has the yield increased, has they gotten better price for the produce, or what are those parameters are. This is a generic assumption, and that is exactly how we go about with farmers income, because those proxies play a major role in your defining how do you go about with calculating farmers income, and your baseline will come in handy to show that net income change. One more question was on the lines of how do we calculate this whole water save for millet cultivation, right? So because see, ideally we could take a very rigorous research-based approach, but one thing that can actually work out for everyone is that you know that how many irrigation cycles does a normal stable crop takes, and how much is the millet taking, right? Because this is something that can, one is a benchmark that could exist in the ecosystem, and one you can navigate, one you could just capture using your own business metrics by talking to your own customers, because that, and you benchmark it against the ecosystem parameter, and then that will eventually give you how much water save is happening and exactly attributable to the intervention that you guys are doing. So it becomes very straightforward, easier, and doesn't have to involve that whole rigorous stage that an early stage startup doesn't want to get into already. But somehow those all these proxies become those signals, right? And works out in the favor of the startups only. So yeah, pretty much that. And it was great talking about like just metrics and data with all of you. So thank you for having.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank you.
much. Have a good evening and a good weekend.
You too.
Thank you.
I'm going to request the cohort members to please stay back. We can stop recording now. We have fairly 5 minutes left for staff hours. I think our sessions have been stretching a bit for the past 2 to 3 sessions now. Payal is just